Welcome. I'm Greg Thomas from Genesys, and thank you so much for joining us.
And I'm Ginger Conlon from Genesys.
And to help you plan for the year ahead, it's time to talk about CX trends.
We've interviewed 5 industry experts for their unique insights, one expert for each trend.
So without further ado, let's get trendy with Accenture to talk about personalization. More and more, consumers expect organizations to understand and anticipate their needs and to personalize every interaction. That expectation is leading to a widening gap between those organizations offering hyper-personalized experiences and tailored proactive communications and those that don't. We're joined by Praj Ramachandra, Managing Director at Accenture, to discuss how AI is enabling ever greater personalization and what CX leaders should be doing to ensure they're meeting customer expectations. Praj, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me.
So let's dive in. So this ability to segment customers and to tailor offers, to infuse an interaction with details about that customer, that's all been around for a while. And 76% of CX leaders in a survey we ran say they're using or piloting AI to personalize their customer experience. So what's new or different from your perspective, and how is AI changing the ability of organizations to deliver personalized experiences?
Great. And Greg, like you said, the tailored or the personalized experience has been there for quite some time. What's new is an important question to answer. With the launch of generative AI, the organization now has an ability to harness the richness of the data at the beginning of the customer acquisition itself and maintain the entire customer data seamlessly throughout the cycle. So this not only helps the organization to leverage generative AI to create real-time responses, but also to understand and create the real-time customer profile and offer the right next best offer and the services to the customers, right? Now, it is almost pushing the contact center from moving away from just a call center to more of a profit center, allowing the organization to cross-sell and upsell because they have so much of relevant data and the right products in the offer that they can give to the client, right? So yes, it is going to be a continued important aspect of offering a personalized and tailored experiences.
Yeah, and of course, as we know, data is the lifeblood of AI. So AI is also enhancing proactive outreach, whether that's gaining a better understanding of an issue and if it might impact a given customer, or the ability to conduct outreach that's more useful to the customer. With 72% of CX leaders believing AI will facilitate all proactive outreach in the future, what do you counsel organizations to be doing to prepare for this?
Great. This is another next important aspect. The reality today is that most organizations are still reactive. They want the customers to reach out to the organization. And after that, they're now thinking about, okay, how do I apply AI to automate the conversation? But let's take a step back and think through. Most of the organization know about customer and their data so much that they don't have to really wait for the customers to call or reach out to the organization service. Simple example. Utility as an organization, they know that the customer bill is higher this month. There's no point in waiting for customer to call about a high bill, or the organization know that there's a faulty meter of the customer premise if it's automated AMI meters. Similarly, if it's a telco, they track the data usage patterns so much, so often. They know that there's a challenge with the data usage or there's a proactive service that they can offer. This is the level of data that the organizations have. Now, when we leverage this data very well, we can make the service invisible, what we call it as invisible service. By reaching out to the customer proactively, knowing potential scenarios of the use cases where the customer may have an issue and reach out to the organization for services, and then reaching out to them through simple SMS or text for offering services takes a long way in terms of improving the customer experience. I'll give a simple example. I recently had a rainstorm in my area or region, and starting from the time when there was a weather forecast, I started getting a text from my utility company saying, there could be a potential outage, and the outage happened. And even when the outage happened, they sent me a proactive message saying, we are working on this issue. There are about 200 people in the region impacted by this. They gave me an ETA. And when it was not even resolved in the ETA, they even immediately sent me this text saying, it'll take another hour or two. But in this entire journey, they kept me aware of what's going on. and they care about my service. They have been informing me proactively, saying that, no, don't worry, I've taken care of your services. In this journey, there was no need for me to have for any reason to call the organization or the company at all for any services. So this is what I'm calling as proactive outreach, making the service invisible. It is going to be a critical factor as we move forward with the objective of improving the customer experience.
Yeah. And I think that's such a great example because it's both good for the consumer, you in this case, what's going on, and it's good for the organization because they keep you happy, but they also minimize any incoming calls and contacts to things that are truly important, not just, hey, my utility seems to be out. So let's stay with that consumer side of the equation for a moment. Consumers generally say they really value personalization, and 56% of them say it's one of the most important factors in a service interaction. What do you think comes next as personalization continues to grow in sophistication?
Yeah, it's a great question again. Um, it becomes important on how we make things simpler. Um, there's a quote saying that, simplicity is the best sophistication that you can offer to the customer, and it is important to keep two things in mind when we talk about personalization. Like I mentioned earlier, leveraging the Gen AI based data, you have the ability to harness the richness of data at the time of customer acquisition. And now you're seamlessly transitioning this data throughout the customer lifecycle. This is going to be the critical part. The second important aspect is having humans as a backup for every single interaction. There's been several questions that have been asked that, hey, with the AI and Gen AI, will there be no agent in the call center? It'll never happen. The future of the AI could be that they will be playing a different role because majority of the interactions are handled by the AI and Gen AI, but the AIs will now be advisors. Having that said, the interaction could be just as simple as SMS or chat or voice, but there's always a human backup. Now, when you have humans as a backup, it is again important to make the transition of an interaction between an AI and human seamless. And there should be no difference for the end customer that there was a transition between an AI and a human. These are the two aspects because it's going to be super critical as we think about how do you make the personalization easier or simpler and adapt to more of new types of working.
Well, Praj Ramachandra from Accenture, thank you so much for joining us to talk about our first trend, personalization.
Thank you, Greg.
What an excellent interview with Praj, especially the concept of rethinking proactive service as invisible services. Making service so proactive and intentional as to be invisible, and then the customer doesn't have to think about their issue at all.
And Ginger, I think that's a perfect transition to the trend about being intentional with your channel strategies. With 65% of consumers globally saying it's important to be able to get service in the channel they prefer, delivering service in the way that's most convenient for the customer is table stakes. But it's not enough to offer multiple channels. Organizations need to be intentional about which channels they use and are best suited for different kinds of interactions. And interactions need to be able to move seamlessly between channels and preserve context. To discuss this trend, we're joined by Sami Beydoun, Team Leader, Student Services Hub at Western Sydney University, to talk about how approaching channel strategies with this kind of intentionality is impacting how the university delivers service. Sami, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's dig in. This trend is about being intentional in channel strategy, not just offering a channel because it's possible to do so, but thinking critically about what makes the most sense. How has this idea of being more intentional with your channels influenced your approach at Western Sydney University?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's critical to ensure that the channels you offer align with the needs and behavioral trends of your audiences. So within the Student Services Hub, which is ultimately a contact center environment. Our key audiences as far as customers are students and applicants. And we're engaged also by members of the wider sort of Western Sydney community. And it's even more complex than that as we have a significant audience of international students and applicants. And they might be offshore and looking to apply, or onshore and looking to re-enroll. So there are many different contexts in which we're communicating with people, and these people all have very diverse needs as a community. So I think given this complexity, we look at channel variety as something that allows us to connect with people in ways that ultimately suit them. And the reality is that the kinds of information people need access to is very context specific and situational within a given interaction. So it can range from them needing a simple one sentence answer, or them needing a far more involved conversation about a comprehensive set of options or navigating sort of complex processes. So we saw the opportunity when we moved over to Genesys to integrate things like two-way SMS, WhatsApp, and Explore, and develop chatbots. And we've been dabbling with a bit of generative AI, as is the current rage when it comes to chatbots. All that stuff appealed to us because we're ultimately acting in the interest of our audiences and then trying to find the best ways to connect with them always.
Cool. And so following on a little bit from that, when you think about the channels, you talked about trying to understand like what the needs are. How do you think through that question of what type of interaction or what type of conversation is our user looking for? And then how we think about which channel is best suited to deliver on that kind of interaction?
Yeah, so I think it's the case that digital channels such as web messaging, I mentioned 2way SMS and WhatsApp, they can seem a little more transactional at times. I think a lot of the interactions we're having through there are people looking for sort of quick pieces of information. And in many cases, this is not a bad thing. I think from a customer service philosophy point of view, we want to have these really involved, human connection-driven, consultative interactions. And there's definitely a place for that. But at the same time, there's quite a bit of research out there, I think, pointing to the fact that people want to be able to solve and self-service the act of solving issues fairly quickly. And the things like 2way SMS, we've noticed, are an absolute game changer in that environment, because what you're able to do with things like 2way SMS on a sort of bulk campaign scale is have that one-to-many outreach approach. And it's ultimately up to the person on the other end to engage with you if they want that assistance. So what's cool is that they can simply acknowledge that they've received it and ignore it. But then we often see people coming back at later points in a process, maybe it's enrollment or something of that sort, and notifying us that they're coming across something and they need a quick pointer on what to do. So that really is the strength, I think, of a lot of these asynchronous messaging options. And while it is possible to have great sort of interactions through there, there are limitations, I think, in the interface of these messaging modalities. Like when you write really long responses, it feels laborious to write them. And then when you look at them on the other end, it feels laborious to read them. So I think that something like the typical voice interaction by phone still has a really sort of strong standing within our contact center setup, because so much of what people want is to go through a vast range of options in a consultative fashion and find what works for them. So we're not just trying to rapid fire solve problems, we're ultimately trying to build rapport with people and help people make decisions about what they're going to study over the next 3 years. So I think the empathy and the level of connection you can have through something like a voice interaction really offers that as a great option to us.
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful sort of explanation of why different channels exist and why they should exist in a contact center to help people address what they need to address where it makes the most sense to have it addressed. So from there, how are you using listening or analytics or insights across the various channels that you offer to understand sort of both what's working, but also to inform the journeys that you want your users and your customers to go on, so that they can then go about their business and solve those challenges and figure out what to study, as you said?
Yeah, that's so important in this day and age, because I think customers do want that omni-channel sort of flexibility, and they want seamless experiences across the range of modalities they're using to engage with us. So I think one of the challenges we have is we have a lot of like record keeping tools, but we fall a little bit short at the moment in the way these things are integrated. So there's a lot of maturity for us to gain in that space. So, for example, the customer journey data in Genesys is great. We can clearly see that someone has engaged with us by voice or by two-way SMS based on the mobile number record and then how that's all sort of grouped together. But then in the web messaging space, we haven't yet fully established how we're going to ID people and then link that in to some sort of customer journey view so that an agent has a comprehensive snapshot of all the ways someone has already engaged with us. So that's something that we're working towards. We're starting to implement things like IVR voice bots to capture some basic identification data so we can start to think about how that stuff appears for agents in Genesys, and then maybe take the same approach to something like chat or where we can ultimately identify people and start to group their information within a single record. And I think the dream model for us, and probably in most big organizations, is to have some sort of unifying CRM system that can ingest all that data and provide some awesome overview of a student's journey with us so far. So also the other thing is moving into Genesys, things like analytics, as far as in-house analytics around topic spotting and sentiment analysis, all those things were completely new to us. So this process of establishing better sort of customer journey tracking practices and then using topic spotting and sentiment sort of analytics to understand the actual outcomes of interactions is something that we're still grappling with. But I think the end goal is to use the analytics to inform us where our knowledge gaps are and where things have fallen short in a journey, while also having that kind of insight maybe packed into the customer journey view of some sort to really know what has happened to someone in their interactions with us. So the short answer is we're using all of these tools to some extent, but the integration and sort of unity of all these things towards a single overview is something that we are definitely working to establish. And I think it's going to be a key priority for us as we move into 2025, which is right around the corner.
So carrying on from that, as you look further out, how do you see those channel strategies evolving? Is it about that kind of integration? Is it something else? Where do you see yourselves in a few years?
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier about the complexity of the institution, I think having an omni-channel setup is going to be the case for the foreseeable future. So absolutely, making sure our agents have the tools to deliver the best experiences across all those channels seamlessly is a key goal for us, and that has a big sort of QA and sort of monitoring component behind it, which I kind of alluded to before. And one thing that we see the need for is more strategic use of things like bots. So in the self-service space, I think there are a lot of things that people can get help with around troubleshooting, like IT issues, or sort of navigating institutional procedures and policies to figure out what their best options are. And I really do think generative AI can play a massive part in that process. So we're currently piloting some generative AI next-gen bots within the Genesys platform. And I think the key to ultimately, like sort of the final step to personalizing someone's experience is giving them some sort of assistant that they can easily access for that self-service support, which can sort of personalize with them, which kind of empathizes with them, but is also extremely accurate and can truly get them across the line with whatever it is they're trying to do. Mm. So I think, it's just about becoming as efficient as possible and ensuring our staff have the tools to deliver the best possible experiences, and then ultimately allowing people to self-service those issues that are little niggles and the things they should be able to get past fairly quickly with a powerful generative AI assistant. So that's where I see us going.
Yeah. Well, Sami Beydoun from Western Sydney University, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about Trend 2, Intentional Channel Strategies Deliver Exceptional Customer Experiences.
Thank you so much, Greg. It was a pleasure.
You are on a roll with these interviews, Greg. So insightful. I was struck by how much foresight and planning Sami and the team at WSU puts into selecting channels that align with students' needs and preferences and the context of their interactions.
I agree. And so let's continue our journey with Megan Burns, who's going to share insights about omnichannel and customer journeys with Ginger.
I'm here with Megan Burns, founder and principal of Experience Enterprises, to discuss Trend 3, customer service strategies tied to business outcomes. Welcome, Megan.
Thanks, Ginger. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. So we're seeing a growing number of organizations move beyond CX initiatives focused primarily on efficiency. They're connecting outcomes of these customer interactions to critical business metrics, illuminating how remarkable customer experiences can impact measures like customer lifetime value and loyalty. Genesis Research found that 74% of CX leaders say it's likely their organizations will shift over the next 3 years or so to more and more measuring the business impact of customer experience, not just focusing on those contact center metrics. And 33% say it's extremely likely. So, Megan, what are you seeing in terms of this trend, and why is it so important right now, more than ever before, to connect customer experience metrics with key business outcomes?
It's a great question, Ginger, and I think there's a couple things going on there. So one is that companies are seeing bigger and broader applications of customer experience. They're understanding that it is a tool that can actually be designed and used to drive certain business outcomes, not necessarily just prevent problems, but actually create loyalty and new business. And so they're looking at it rather than something to just make sure isn't a problem, something that they can actually use as a tool. I think it also represents more maturity on the part of customer experience practices and leaders, because rather than think about it, customer experience is good, how do I prove the business case? They're flipping the script and saying if the goal is to increase customer retention or drive use of a product, how would we or could we change the customer experience to make that happen? So they're starting with the business problem and seeing how customer experience can apply to help solve that business problem. So I'm not surprised that the conversation is moving more toward that business-oriented metric.
Yeah, that's an important distinction that you just made. And it makes me wonder, how is this changing those success metrics so that they're making sure that these things are aligned?
That I think is a work in progress. I think it depends on the company and how they choose to use customer experience. Some companies say the experience is the product or it is the differentiator. That's a different strategy than a company that is trying to be what I call consistently good and strategically amazing. So for some companies, the best strategy is be there, deliver consistently. And every once in a while, if there's a situation, we want to wow people. But, they're not trying to be the Disney of whatever their industry is. And so I think the metrics tie directly to the business strategy and connect back to, are we creating the kind of experiences that are going to drive the behavior that is what we're counting on in our strategy?
Right, that makes sense. We're also seeing service leaders in particular leverage insights from customer interactions. And then, they're doing this, of course, because they want to improve those interactions, but not just within the contact center, really across the full customer journey. And they want to influence that, to create a better experience, but also to be more strategic in the organization to align with the trend that we're talking about, right? So at the same time, 82% of consumers say A brand is only as good as its service. So, with that in mind, what are you seeing as some of the benefits to organizations when their CX leaders go beyond customer service and really share insights across the full customer journey to improve all of the other channels and functions and how those connect together and deliver those better experiences?
Yeah, it's such an interesting phenomenon. So when things go right, there's not really much for the customer to notice. So if a company offers something you're interested in, or suddenly anticipates that you would need a certain thing, right? It just kind of, we're happy, but we don't take that much note of it. But that's the kind of context and background that service conversations can pull out and then be used to design things in other parts of the business. So the service itself, what people traditionally think of as service, is critically important, but that conversation with the customer and the insights that those folks have can inform all of the other parts of the customer journey that don't involve the traditional service organization. And I think that's something that companies are starting to tap into and realize more and more, is that when you're talking to a customer about a specific problem or issue, you can learn things that are bigger and broader than that one problem and issue. And the better you are at using them, the more strategic you are at using them, then the more valuable that information becomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you think about what you said before about consistency and intentionality, creating that across the full customer journey by sharing this information can have an incredible impact on the customer experience and then on the business outcomes.
Yeah, even just knowing how people interpret different words. I just had a 20-minute conversation with a friend recently where we realized after like 4 conversations, we were defining the same word in different ways. And it never occurred to one of us that the other one would think about that word that way. And so even things like that can be really helpful in informing how you talk to customers in marketing and messaging and languaging. Languaging, that's not a word, language. There's just so many opportunities.
Absolutely. Well, Megan, thank you again for sharing your insights on trend number 3, customer service strategies tied to business outcomes.
Thanks, Ginger.
Ginger, I think it's notable that Megan emphasized that CX is a tool that can be designed and used to drive specific business outcomes, not just prevent and address problems. CX initiatives can create loyalty and new business.
I also liked her reference to sharing customer service insights with other teams and other functions that impact the customer journey. Those are often the insights that can surface opportunities for business growth.
Yeah, and one common thread in using customer service data is, of course, being ethical about it, which brings us to our next trend on ethical AI. As AI continues to proliferate, ethical AI considerations have become a strategic imperative. Whether developed in-house or sourced externally, organizations need AI solutions to pass high levels of scrutiny, focusing on transparency, lack of bias, reversibility, and explainability. To explore this trend further, we're joined by Bill Dummett, Chief Privacy Officer at Genesys. Bill, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to be here. AI is a really interesting technology. It fundamentally changes the way that we interact with machines, right? This is not a typical technological advancement. This is something that will change the way all of us interact with computers that we do a lot throughout our day. So this is a cultural issue as much as it is a technical one.
Absolutely. So we did some research earlier this year, and we found that 69% of CX leaders say their organization has a plan for ethically deploying AI, which is a very encouraging sign. That's roughly 7 out of 10. In your conversations with folks, what do you hear is the most frequent misconception about ethical AI?
Yeah, oftentimes when we speak to customers, they can think that making sure the AI systems are ethical is a one stop and you're done kind of problem. Like check the box on the front end and your system's ethical and you're good to go. And that's not really how these systems function. AI by its nature is going to be pulling out patterns that human beings can't see. And that's the whole point of using these systems. So you need to make sure that you're doing regular checkups on whether or not your AI systems are producing bias. Are they affecting different communities in ways that you didn't expect? Are there outcomes that you did not expect to happen as it evolves over time? AI evolves and it's iterative, so you need to make sure that your checks are not just at the front end, but that it's a constant recurring cycle to make sure that you have an ethical system that's deploying the way that you want.
Right. As it continues to learn, you need to sort of learn alongside it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Similarly, that research found that in line with wanting to sort of stay on top of things, 41% of CX leaders said they're adopting formal AI ethics policies. What guidance would you give to folks watching when they're creating a policy to make sure it's robust and stands up to the test of time?
Yeah, so AI regulation is a really changing landscape right now. So if you want to make something that you don't have to come back to the drafting table over and over again to keep complying with laws, you want to be as future-proof as possible. One of the things I would suggest is look towards Europe. They seem to be out in front when it comes to AI regulation. So even if that's not your jurisdiction, look at the frameworks that people are establishing in order to meet the EU AI Act. As US laws start to evolve, oftentimes those will look to structures and guidance that's already been established in the EU and will follow suit in the US. So think about it from a global perspective because your business may change and go global. And just through the nature of the internet, you're going to be interacting with people around the world with your tools. So look to those AI frameworks, make sure that you're measuring things on the front end, doing your risk assessments early, and involve everybody at the company that's going to be touching that. There are a lot of teams that are going to need to have a say when you're building these ethical systems, and make sure you have a big table to start with.
Yeah, which is always good advice whenever you're doing some sort of technology project, right? Bring everybody to the table. So, as I said in the intro, a lot of organizations, perhaps most organizations, are going to source at least some of their AI powered technology externally. It's not all going to be home built. When organizations are talking with vendors about AI solutions, what should they be asking to understand both the technical considerations, but also how things were built and sort of philosophical alignment kinds of questions?
Yeah, you should certainly be digging into that with your vendors. A good place to start with that is the AI model cards, just to get an idea of how the model is built and how it functions. Beyond that, you really want to drill down into what kind of data of yours is going to be processed by your vendor. Are they going to be training their models off of your data? Where is that data getting sent to? That's going to be really important to you and to your consumers so you can build trust with them to know where that goes. Know what third parties they're using. Who are they hosting? What kind of engines do they use? And just think about where their data models are coming from. How did they build these models? Is that something that may create bias in the system that you have? So just be aware of that and do regular checks with your vendors as well. Don't just talk to them when you're trying to go through the sales pitch. Talk to them like on a yearly basis. When you see updates and if you don't exactly know what's going on, feel free to reach out and talk to them. They'll be happy to chat through their systems with you.
Yeah, because you really are, you're entering a relationship with those vendors, right? Where you need to continually make sure what you're doing and what they're doing is aligned. And as you say, that you have that kind of understanding.
Yeah, your consumers trust you with their data. So you need to make sure that you trust the vendors that you're using just as well. You need to make sure that you're a good steward of all that data that flows through your system.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about kind of regulations a minute ago, but as you said, regulations in every jurisdiction may be unique. But what kind of common threads do you expect? And for people who are watching and are trying to think about how do we build for the future when it comes to understanding regulations, making sure we're compliant with what's already being considered, but also what might be coming down the line. Like, what do you expect people to need to be prepared for?
Yeah, even in the States and especially globally, we have a patchwork of AI regulation right now. You have different maturity levels of regulators that may understand the technology or may not, which leads to a lot of different rules. But there are some recurring themes that we see. First off, I would say it's making sure that you have a proper inventory of your AI systems, meaning that you know what's happening with that system. You know what data is going in, how that's getting processed, what's going out. As part of that, you need to make sure that you also have ongoing checks, that you're assessing that system on a regular basis to make sure that it's working the way that you want. And one of the major things I see repeat is transparency. Everybody's nervous about this kind of going out into the wild and no one knows when they're talking to a computer, so to speak. But there's a large push to make sure that if you're using an AI tool with the consumer, let them know that. And we're getting to a point in this technology where it's evolving where customers are more comfortable with that. It's not going to scare off customers if you tell them they're speaking to a chat AI agent in order to get their answers. A lot of times, customers are going to be okay with it. You just need to make sure that you're telling them at the front end when they're talking to a human and when they're talking to an AI system.
Yeah, I love that focus on transparency, right? As you say, consumers are willing to talk to AIs. We all interact with AIs regularly, but we want to know when we're speaking with a bot versus when we're speaking with a human. Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about trend number 4, ethical AI becomes a strategic imperative.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for having me.
The idea that Bill shared that I thought was especially notable is to conduct regular checkups on your AI system. Doing so is essential for ensuring that they're always working the way that you intend and that you're minimizing bias.
Agreed. That's so important. So now let's pivot to our final trend about how workforce management needs to evolve for the era of AI.
Hello, everyone. Joining me is Robin Garris, CEO and Principal Analyst of Metrigy, and we are going to discuss Trend 5. What is Trend 5? Approaches to managing the workforce are evolving for AI-powered customer experiences. So welcome, Robin.
Happy to be here.
So glad you're here with us today. So our research and conversations with industry experts like you show a shift in employee engagement strategies. Organizations are realizing that their existing approaches just don't reflect the needs of today's multi-generational distributed workforce, especially considering that they're working in contact centers that are continually evolving to be more multi-channel and AI enabled. So with that in mind, what are some of the key strategic changes that you're seeing in this area?
Yeah, first, I think you're right. I mean, it is something that's changing quite a bit right now, and for the reasons you mentioned. But I do see that companies, fortunately, are recognizing this and also realizing that AI can help a lot in this area. So when we look at something like workforce management, I see that as a sort of a broader piece, or one piece, I guess, of the broader workforce engagement management category. So this is where you'd be using AI to automate scheduling, capacity planning, and forecasting. And when companies do that, they're actually reducing OpEx by saving each supervisor nearly 2 hours per week, according to our research. And I see that as something that's going to keep improving and increasing, by the way, as AI learns more and more about, the seasonal differences in a company and things like that. But moving forward, we see about actually more than 60% of companies say that they are or will view their workforce as both human agents and AI agents when it comes to scheduling. So I think that makes it a lot more complex, and we definitely need workforce engagement management to do things right, to really effectively do that capacity planning, scheduling, forecasting, things like that. So we do see companies embracing WEM like even more broadly, and that includes categories like coaching and quality management, knowledge management, things like that really help agents to improve their performance and also their own satisfaction. So what we have found is by improving the employee experience, companies can reduce their turnover rates, which is hovering at about 32% right now. Wow. So that's a big driver, is just, okay, we got to stop this revolving door. So strategically, we definitely see companies relying on AI and automation to complement supervisors' responsibilities as well as the agents. And I think that's one of the big drivers to using WEM and using it in a different way, is that the information is there, it's accessible, so let's use it, let's leverage it. One of the things, for example, is using AI to do training sprints, and that helps with onboarding. Companies can do this, or companies that do this actually onboard their agents about 25% faster than those that don't, in our research that we just completed. So that was kind of a big one. You can get people on board more quickly, get that revenue started from what they're generating, or get them to help with customer service and get that all done more quickly. So that's a good one. Using AI for quality management is another area we see where you can take AI enabled coaching derived from that quality management analysis and help agents perform better, help supervisors coach better. And I'd say probably the last thing, well, not the last, but the last thing I'll say today, I guess there's a lot more to talk about this, right? Is a lot of companies strategically, I think now are considering voice of the customer as part of workforce engagement management. They don't look at it just in isolation anymore. So, and it's also not just like that post-interaction survey, but it's also using AI as inferred sentiment. So using AI to infer what my CSAT score would have been had I answered the survey, but I didn't, and also some other passive measurements, just like length of call, how the call went, what word choices were used, all sorts of things. And so I think when you analyze what the customer is saying, the voice of the customer, and you share that with your employees in as close to as real time as possible, they can address those problems immediately. That they're maybe today I'm not being friendly enough. Maybe today I sound tired. And I'm getting feedback. And I can change that right away before, some smaller problem might turn into a bigger one. Ultimately, it helps me to do a better job as an agent. And it might ultimately result in things like a bonus or even a commission if I'm in a sales role. So a lot going on in this space for sure.
Absolutely. It sounds like WEM technologies and the strategies around it are really creating richer experiences for, agents, managers, agents
really.
and their supervisors, quality managers, et cetera, which then, of course, is going to translate into better customer experiences. And also, if all of these things are being streamlined, even though there's the challenges that you mentioned, there's going to be cost savings and et cetera.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, so you talked about some of the technology side too. So let's look forward. What are you seeing as all of this? How might it shift over the next few years? And along with that, are you seeing any success measures changing?
Yeah. So I think most of the technology value today that we see results in things like time savings, like you mentioned, time savings for supervisors and probably job performance improvements for agents. And you'll also see time savings for agents as well, but it kind of gets into that operational cost. But by the way, what's interesting is you see companies saving money on specific use cases. They keep investing and investing and investing in this technology. So it's kind of like a two-prong. They'll save money on a specific use case, but overall they're spending more money in CX. 80% of companies are spending more money in CX. The increase in spending in AI is significant. So it's just something that they keep investing in and adding not only more technology, but even different types of people, by the way. They're adding data scientists, data analysts, content management people. So it's really kind of interesting to see how the shape of the staffing is changing too, how the makeup of that is changing. But I would say moving forward, when you look at, WEM, if it's implemented strategically, it will reduce turnover and it will improve business metrics. I think the two most important ones we're going to see improved are revenue and CSAT. So, if you use AI for quality management, what does that do? Well, that allows analysis on every single call. You can have AI listening in on every call and then giving you a report, a categorization, a summarization as a supervisor of each agent and how they're doing. And 61% of companies that use AI are using it in that way. And so what we found in our research is that it saves each supervisor an average of 3 hours per week. That starts really adding up. I think, again, that's going to keep getting better and better over time. So what does that do for agents? It definitely gives them a comparative analysis on everything they do so that they can perfect their skills. I just think, wouldn't it be great if we could do this with every area of the company? You could have this analysis all the time and how you're doing and continually improve. So I think that's really a good thing that WM is doing. I think also kind of going hand in hand with that is explicitly using AI for coaching and training. We see about 52% of companies doing this now, and it is saving supervisors 11 hours per week. I was kind of blown away by that one because that's a lot of time savings. They were spending with coaching each individual team member that they can now turn over to AI, or at least have AI complement what they're doing and reduce some of the time that they were spending on that. What they're doing with that saved time is they're managing larger teams now. In a lot of companies, about 34% of companies say that, well, we're changing our ratios. But they're also having their agents do things, or I'm sorry, having their supervisors rather do things like proactive outreach to ask to the at-risk customers so that they can ultimately reduce that churn. So I think that's a really good use of that time saved. Who doesn't want to reduce churn, right? A couple other things I see: scheduling flexibility, so enabling employees to have more control of their schedules. So giving them, sort of a portal where they can go in and do shift trading and split shifts, get overtime. Maybe they want to work part-time in certain weeks. Just having all that intelligence built into the platform, so the supervisor doesn't have to look at every single scheduling change. So right now we see about 53% of companies doing this to help reduce turnover. So it's good. It's really, the agents are loving this. And I think going along the same lines of that, using WEM to identify when agents are burnt out and provide them with more breaks. So when you think about it right now, 77% of agents are handling complex issues, either all or most of the time. And that's primarily because AI is handling the easy issues. So, as an agent, your brain doesn't get a break just to answer a question like, hey, what's your overnight mailing address? It's always complex. So to help kind of address the fallout from that, 44% of companies actually do give agents more breaks during the day. And they use like sentiment analysis and other AI capabilities to help identify when an agent is burnt out. So I think that's a big one. And another thing I would say when you asked about metrics, I know this isn't directly under the WEM umbrella, but it's one that I see a lot of impact from. And that's using Agent Assist or Copilot, whatever term you use, as well as analytics to help agents meet their sales quotas and their service KPIs. And that ultimately goes to employee satisfaction. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I love all of this. You see supervisors being able to be more strategic. And, if the AI is doing a lot of the prep work for them, they can really be more engaged when they're talking to their team. And then you've got, agents having better experiences because they're getting more assistance and they can then be more focused when they're talking to customers. So
absolutely.
It's amazing. Well, Robin, thank you so much for sharing all your insight, your research findings. It's been fantastic. Talking about Trend 5, approaches to managing the workforce are evolving for AI-powered customer experiences. Thanks again.
Thanks, Ginger.
I really liked what Robin said about how WEM is going far beyond benefiting agents to also enrich supervisors' roles, helping them to be more strategic and drive a better experience for their agents, which in turn allows them to have more fruitful interactions with customers.
That stood out for me too. And with that, thank you all so much for joining us to learn about customer experience trends in 2025. If you'd like to learn more, scan the QR code on your screen to download a copy of the Genesys Contact Center Buyer's Guide, which is chock full of great information to help you ask the right questions about CX platforms and related technologies.